The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to our webcast. Learn how public agencies and governments worldwide plan for data management success. I'd like to start with a few introductions today. Our first speaker is Melanie Mecca, CEO of DataWise Inc. and was managing author of the Data Management Maturity DMM models, formerly CMMI's Institute Director of Data Management Products and Services. Melanie has created a unique method for evaluating data management capabilities, which we will be reviewing on our webcast today, and has also led development of CMMI's Enterprise Data Management Expert and Enterprise Data Management Associate certifications. DataWise and Sandhill are certified CMMI Institute partners and frequently work together to quickly evaluate and rapidly accelerate clients' data management strategies, programs, and education. We're pleased to have Melanie with us today. Joining Melanie and as part of the team is Emarie Pope. Emarie is one of Sandhill's senior project managers and data governance specialist. Emarie works with Melanie on DMM assessments as well as working with clients on data governance solutions. Emarie will be responding to the questions raised in the chat box on your right-hand side during the webcast and will help us address any unanswered questions at the end of the webcast. And of course, you're listening to Robert Ludden, Vice President of Sandhill Consultants. So with the introductions complete, I'd like to ask Melanie to introduce the topic on how public agencies and governments worldwide plan for data management success. Melanie, over to you.
Hello and welcome to our webinar. We're very pleased that you can attend. This webinar is going to concentrate on how public agencies can succeed at planning their enterprise data management activities and programs. And we're going to talk a little bit about challenges as well as the solutions to those challenges. So as Robert introduced me, and I am the managing author of the Data Management Maturity Model, so you can expect to hear a little bit about the Data Management Maturity Model during the course of this presentation. I also developed certification courses and several derivative products, among them a patient data demographic data quality framework for health and human services in the U.S., and a large data stewards computer-based training suite for the state of Arizona. And I concentrate on leading DMM assessments, training. I have a really extensive background in enterprise data management, enterprise architecture, and enterprise data architecture. So that's where I come from, and that is the type of observations that you will get. We're going to talk about the challenges, as I mentioned, and also success factors, factors that are prevalent in public agencies that allow you to succeed, as well as what you should do first. And I'm going to tell you, you should achieve a benchmark of your current state. So you have your arms around the data scope and your arms around where your practices currently are. We're going to mention how to best engage staff across the agency, the importance of establishing data management as a permanent agency function. And then we're going to talk some nuts and bolts about how you can create a collaboratively developed data management strategy. Some tips for building engagement and adoption for data management at your agency, and links to further information. So let's start with data management challenges for public agencies. Now, in my long career, I have spent approximately 2/3 of the time working assisting federal agencies, from defense, intelligence, other agencies like the State Department, Immigration and Naturalization Service, and in my last stint doing federal consulting, extensive involvement with regulatory agencies and federal financial agencies. And I've also taught courses for other countries and organizations in other countries. But we can generalize about public agencies, and we can start with the drivers. Commercial enterprises are often concerned with growth of the revenue and also competitive advantage, and many of them want to monetize their data, whereas public agencies are particularly focused, of course, on the successful mission performance for which they were formed and for which they exist, as well as customer service for the individuals, groups, or organizations that the agency serves. And another driver is how to justify funding, because as we know, public agencies are typically subject to annual funding requests, and the funding is always tight because it's public funding. So getting your share of funding requires you to have very good overall business cases and substantial justification. Also, most public agencies are older. They've been around for a while. One that I worked with was the Securities and Exchange Commission. That was the first assessment that I ever led in 2012. And, they had been around for decades and decades. So the age of an organization typically results in having a lot of siloed functions, organizational units, and business processes. And this is an obstacle because it also implies that not only the application layer, but the data layer is quite complex. And there's a lot of prevalence of overlapping data stores and overlapping functions in the applications. So it requires a lot of navigation, and there are challenges with that. Sometimes there is a difficulty for those reasons in establishing a cogent strategic direction for shared data. Many public agencies are not only sharing data interagency and intra-agency, but they're also sharing data with the public or other external customers for the data. So data sharing is very important. How do we decide what data is shared, and how do we decide where to take it, and how to evolve that data layer to maximize data sharing? That is a very strong consideration for the public agencies that I've worked with. And then people in public agencies are very dedicated to their mission, but they are often kind of siloed in their own business functions and processes. So there is a lack of data literacy among agency staff. And that can persist for decades. So sometimes it's a challenge to get everyone on the same page and let them share core concepts. Public agencies also, because of their planning and funding, they typically are less agile in being able to jump on opportunities and execute them quickly, because they have accountability to governments, they have accountability for funding, they have accountabilities built in the organization itself. So sometimes that will slow you down. We mentioned funding and budgeting constraints. You're always conscious of that. Then also a public agency can be subject to political redirection or even program discontinuation when the legislative or executive governance bodies change. And then, of course, public agencies are setting an example for fair procurement practices. And that means that the procurement practices are typically lengthy and complex. So all of these are challenges that you live and you know. And let's look at factors that are favorable for public agencies. And that includes government mandates, which have the ability of pushing agencies and the staff within agencies to effect change and make rapid progress. So even though the agencies themselves, in general terms, tend to be less agile than commercial enterprises, they do have the ability to get everyone on the same page top down, and that is an advantage. We'll talk about some examples of that shortly. Also, public agency employees tend to be extremely dedicated to the mission, and I can say that after 25, 30 years of working with public agencies. And that includes, in recent years, the state of Arizona, where I've been privileged to work with them and help them with their state enterprise data management goals and objectives over the past few years. And I've been very impressed with that, and it's a pleasure to work with public agencies for that reason. Public agencies also have accountability, and as I said, just as with government mandates that come top down, that is helpful in that you need to show success. So it's a driver for getting things accomplished and having progress and milestone accomplishments. And then, of course, public agencies have typically permanent or relatively permanent missions, and therefore they endure. And the strength there is it gives you a good time horizon for strategic planning. Just like countries, I think the best known example of countries and their timeline for strategic planning is China, which has 50 to 100-year plans, what their plan to minimize and eventually eliminate starvation within the country. So you have that going for you, and that really is helpful. You can have 5-year plans, 10-year plans, multi-decade plans. And then public agencies are strong on policy, which is that policies can be developed and then can be enforced for compliance, and policies are essential for driving change within public agencies. And then also, there are drivers that cause public agencies to frequently be innovators. So because major initiatives that are long-term and expensive require public funding. So just within the U.S. government, we have the internet invented by the government. We have excellent standards originally developed by EPA for data metadata and data representation. We have all of the NIST standards for data interoperability, security, privacy. We have the enterprise architecture that had the wonderful segment architectures across business units and organizations, data.gov, the data center optimization. The federal government was among the first large industries, if we can use that term, to go to the cloud and leveraging the Internet of Things, etc. And then we have many other examples, like in the UK and the UAE, they have massive smart cities initiatives where they're really pushing the envelope of change. Some more. Federal agencies and public agencies do have greater awareness recently that data problems are mission problems, and mission problems typically end up with a data problem. So that is becoming increasingly clear with all of the demands and the initiatives that come from the public agency. Also, they have been leaders in data security and privacy considerations. For the SEC, for example, we added some process areas to the DMM specifically around data lineage, data security, data privacy, and the agency scored its best in those areas because in that case, the federal government here in the US was more advanced than private industry at the time. And therefore, public agencies can seed the industry within their country. Public agencies now are aware of and have a strong need to leverage advanced technologies, machine learning and artificial intelligence. For example, one agency in the state of Arizona who is responsible for, among many other programs, administering mandated childcare, that director was telling me that she had 30, 40 years of childcare data about individuals who were either likely to or not likely to pay child support. And that is just one of the many examples of a perfect application for artificial intelligence to detect patterns based on various parameters and try multiple scenarios so that eventually the agency would be able to profile who is likely to pay child support that's mandated and who is not likely. So there are many, many applications for public agencies for these technologies. Data lakes, of course, is a way to store a lot of data and use high-speed parallel processing to improve the performance of more structured and rather rigid the data warehouse layer that agencies built in the past in the late 80s through the 90s and early 2000s. So contemporary architectures are very important for public agencies, as well as data virtualization. How can I use data from all these various sources without having to redesign all of those sources, which is a massive, timely, and expensive task? And then, of course, predictive analytics. Because the public agencies are focused on long-term results as well as short-term results, they need to have ways of predicting how trends are going to go, what their services will evolve to in the future, how to serve better, when you have to be watching and monitoring certain key elements, like the Arizona Department of Water Resources is always monitoring well levels to detect effective use of water and water preservation. So there are many country mandates as well to improve shared published data. So the US, of course, has the Federal Data Strategy, and its watch term is leveraging data as a strategic asset. It's come out with 10 principles, 40 key practices. There's a 2020 action plan with a 5 to 10 year horizon. And that action plan is for each agency to identify core mission data needs, core assets, assess their data management maturity, what are our practices like, increase staff skills and governance, and inventory the data. So this is an example of long-range planning and a very detailed strategy for how to evolve the data assets. In Canada, we have the Data Strategy Roadmap for Federal Public Service, and there's a quote, "Through the power of data, right, transforming governments by changing the way they operate, make decisions, and deliver services." So Canada is also dedicated countrywide to improving data assets and improving data management. And Canada has mandated that departments and agencies have to create a data strategy, come up with governance roles and accountability, and develop standards and guidelines, specifically to leverage that data as a strategic asset for better public service. In the UK, it was one of the key participants in a general data protection regulation. They also have a national data strategy targeting 2030, the vision of the future. And their watch phrase is building a world-leading data economy through data-driven decisions. So they're emphasizing information sharing, reference data registers that can be shared across agencies, etc. South Africa has big initiatives in data governance and data sharing. And of course, China is really pushing big data, artificial intelligence. They have a data privacy law, which is unveiling and in some cases is more restrictive than GDPR. And they've come out with financial data governance for all the financial institutions and standards for scientific data. And the UAE has data initiatives. They are staffing up like crazy in the data governance and data architecture areas, and also in artificial intelligence and analytics. They have the Dubai Smart City initiative, which is going to connect everything in the city. And of course, in the UK, we have Glasgow and other cities that are also doing smart city initiatives. So lots of successes and lots of awareness. Now, switching to planning, let's start with some of the basics, because failing to plan is planning to fail. This is Delarice Ambrose, who was at the Carnegie Mellon Institute and was a Fortune 500 consultant for many years. And she came up with this chart. If you want successful change, you must have all of these elements in place. You need a vision. You need to make sure that the staff has the proper skills, that there are incentives for change, that you have the resources in place, and that you have a plan. And if you look at the second line from the bottom, you'll see without a plan, there are false starts. And this is a useful kind of meta diagram to get you in the mood for what we're going to talk about. Now, we are talking about the Enterprise Data Management Program. So whereas if you look at the diagram on the top right, you'll see that data management functions are taking place all the time in IT, in specific individual projects, in the business lines. But the EDM program definition is the infrastructure, programs, projects, and staff resources that an organization commits to for the purpose of establishing and following sound data management practices for its prioritized data assets, for its most important data assets. The goals of an EDM program are, of course, trusted data, data of high quality that's available and that ensures customer confidence for decisions. And the next bullet, analytics, making better decisions about risk and making better decisions through analytics. That's both reporting and as well as predictive analytics and modeling and simulation. Some organizations in countries such as defense and intelligence have advanced way beyond most commercial enterprises in this area, and others who didn't have the mission drivers to do so are kind of catching up. So also we want to enable innovative technologies. So data design, organization, and improvement of quality and data assets for advanced data insights. And finally, a goal of a cogent EDM program is cost reduction through operational efficiency. So implementation of improved and standardized practices not only help evolve the data assets to the optimal state based on the driver's aspirations and strategy for the agency, but also will help eliminate redundant data and streamline operational processes. And all this leads to cost savings. Now, in planning for effective data management, public agencies, as I think we've pointed out, are very well positioned to create practical strategies and plans. But our observation would say, don't fly blindfolded. So first step in coming up with a great plan and carrying it out is to know what practical reality is on the ground today in your agency, or as we say, wherever you are, there you are. So we advocate evaluating the current state of your data management practices and benchmarking them precisely, discovering the facts about them, whether good, neutral, or challenging and bad. Let's measure them so that you have a very good picture of where you are now and where you want to be in the future and where the gaps are. And then let's come up with a plan and roadmap to improve rapidly our capabilities so that we can meet all the objectives that we mentioned. So that includes figuring out what our scope is, what the initiatives are that are going to address the scope, what data management disciplines we need to strengthen or establish over the time horizon that we've chosen. And next, we need to commit to a permanent EDM program, as I described. So you need a staff, you need an organization within the agency to lead and execute all of the elements of this program. You need to determine the domains, the data domains, that is, large data groupings, or the data sets that are most critical in mission success. So one of the agencies I worked for a long time was the Pension Benefits Guaranty Corporation. And of course, they were interested in practitioners, organizations who had defined benefit pension plans, participants, people who were receiving pension benefits, eligible for them, future beneficiaries, etc., and pension plans, the means by which they took over pension plans, funded them, and so on. So those would be three big domains for the PBGC. And all agencies, regardless of size or complexity, have prioritized primary data domains and data sets. And the strategy itself is the rationale. Why are we doing this program, what we're going to do with the program, and when we're going to do it. And then a recommended overall strategy for how to implement it is to pilot and then institutionalize the sound practices. And by practices, I'm including policies, processes, standards, training, guidelines, governance, and templates. So this may all sound like, oh, this is common sense. So what should I use to benchmark my processes? And I'm suggesting, surprise, the data management maturity model, which is a reference model framework designed to evaluate fundamental enterprise data management practices. So it is designed as a measurement instrument to evaluate gaps, strengths, and the relative resilience and maturity of your current program. It contains a built-in path and guidelines for improvement. It was developed independently by CMMI Institute, which was formerly Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute. CMMI Institute was a spin-off in 2012 who took the DMM maturity model to publication. It had a massive number of primary authors and 70 peer reviewers. It took 3.5 years to develop. And it has many functional practices and 596 example work products. Probably all of the authors had a collective about 1,500 years of practical experience in building and implementing these programs. And to get anything in the model, you had to work really hard, prove it was practical, and give examples of where it had been implemented and where it had been successful. So you have a pretty good abstract line in the middle of the DMM for what other organizations have done and how organizations typically develop. Any industry, any technology stack is applicable, the DMM is applicable to, because we're talking about practices, policy standards, guidelines that apply to all data, whether it's hosted internally in the cloud, whether you have DB2 mainframe or the latest and greatest cloud source software, doesn't matter. You still are responsible for your data. So the DMM has become a respected industry standard and an approach for how to know where you are. So it's a baseline. And it leads to the development of a well thought out EDM program and many specific improvements as well as acceleration initiatives and projects. So very briefly about the DMM, and we're all happy to give you as much information as you like about the DMM. And you'll see at the end, we're going to invite you to email us and we will send you articles and an abridged version of the DMM to peruse. So I'm just going to hit the highlights here. It has 5 categories of fundamental data management practices and supporting processes that constitute good housekeeping for your program and for managing your data assets. So we start with data management strategy, because why do programs not get off the ground? Why do they fail? Why are they not communicated? Because you haven't developed a collaborative and approved data management strategy. Of course, the data management function within that category is very important, and we're going to talk about that today. Data governance includes those key processes that are dependent on people within the organizational units of the agency coming together to make decisions about data that is shared. If some of your data is not shared, for example, if you're an agency that's small and you have a couple of buildings and you have a maintenance schedule for plumbing in that building, that is probably not in the scope of key mission data. That is an important but ancillary function. So those individuals who represent the knowledge about the data from the core business processes and mission functions would be highly engaged, not only in making decisions about access and definitions and how we should keep knowledge about the data, but what are the core business terms for our important data? And what information, that is metadata, do we want to keep about our data assets? Data quality is very important because it is by itself aimed at improving the condition of your data. So the DMM has a 360-degree approach to data quality represented by the 4 process areas: data quality strategy, data profiling, data quality assessment, and data cleansing. And then in data operations, organizations often do a wonderful job at functional requirements, not so great on the data requirements. So the DMM has a lot of good practices advocated in data requirements. Data lifecycle management is coming up with authoritative data sources for your core data, as well as managing it across the lifecycle and data lineage, which in general, I could say that after leading 30 assessments for federal, state, and commercial organizations, people don't do a very good job in general on data lineage, even for the most important data. It's a big job. And the DMM has lots of good information about it. And then managing your data providers, both internal and external data that you procure from outside the agency. Then there is platform and architecture. How do you develop the target data architecture? What data standards do you need to develop and apply? How do you pick a platform? There are right ways and wrong ways, and I'm not going to bore you with the stories of failures that commercial and public agencies have made in picking platforms, but I have a lot of them, and I'm sure you do too. Best practices for integrating data, and how do you manage historical data, data archiving, and records retention. And then the supporting processes are what you should always do, and you pretty much do them in the application development, systems engineering place, which is coming up with good metrics, managing processes, your assets, coming up with quality assurance processes, managing risk, and managing configuration. So this is the successive capability ladder that's built into the DMM. So very briefly, level 1 is project level accomplishment. And those are usually fairly easy to achieve because within your agency, at least one project has done some really good things about managing data. And if you meet that, then you would be fully met in level 1. At level 2, we're looking at more difficult practices and that they need to be exposed across an entire line of business, or they need to be across an entire large program. For example, the ERP system would count as a level 2 instantiation. And at level 3, the processes that are being developed with their work products, policies, standards, guidelines, etc., training, need to be intended to be implemented across the scope of enterprise data, your important data enterprise-wide. And then if the organization needs to go higher in the scale of perfection and nirvana, you can use level 4, which is metrics-based management of data management through statistical analysis and quantitative techniques. And at level 5, there is a continuous improvement built on the foundation of embedded sound practices. Most public agencies, in my experience to date, are roughly level 2 agencies, because they've done really great things in their programs or in their enterprise data warehouse or with their ERP system, and those are well supported. However, oftentimes those good practices are not well extended across all of the business lines and all of the mission functions. So this is just a sample of some organizations that have achieved enduring value for their EDM program in structuring it, carrying it out, coming up with the initiatives, aligning with in-flight initiatives, gaining funding. And you'll see a lot of federal agencies there. For example, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas is building its program based on EDM results, assessment results. The Department of the Interior in the US has adopted it as a standard. And so far, our international organizations, and you'll see a lot of state of Arizona agencies there, a lot of our international organizations have not yet included government agencies, but rather commercial agencies. But we think that based on our experience, a lot of this is generalizable and will be true across the board, regardless of the country. So if you use the DMM to help you find out where you are, which is step A of coming up with your strategy and plan, very quickly, the method that we used was developed as the DMM was being developed. And the objective we were trying to achieve was, how do we get maximum organizational engagement? Because as you're well aware, the big problem in enterprise data management is that it has been over decades that the lines of business or the mission function areas within your agency have not completely realized the number of responsibilities they have for the data they create and manage. And actually, it is their data. It just goes through the pipes and features that IT creates. So that was our goal with the DMM, bring the business and IT together with the help of data management. So the engagement is very time-boxed. Once the organization is prepared, it can be done in 4 weeks. And it serves as a collaboration event to get your stakeholders on the same page. It also manages, it interrogates your capabilities line by line, inch by inch, and gains consensus about the state of the organization. That consensus discussion in itself reveals a great deal of sharing of good practices. And I can give you a lot of examples. For example, in a financial organization, there was one area of the organization, trading and markets, that had very sound operationalized governance. It had a business glossary. It had a metadata repository. It had data quality programs. And the other areas of this rather siloed financial organization weren't aware of any of that, and therefore could not utilize or leverage that for their own benefit. And that's what comes out in the assessment. There's supplemental interviews involved to get key business input and decide what the organization's aspirations are, and then detailed reviews of work products. which are evidence that the processes are being performed. So the deliverables from the assessment are a final report that has the scores, identification of gaps, remediation recommendations for those gaps. It collects strengths and accomplishments that can be leveraged across the organization, and you get customized initiative recommendations, typically across an 18 or 24-month period. So this is like a sequential roadmap of you being you and you wanting to be where you want to be. What should you do as the best acceleration path? So this is a long report. It's built bottom up. And then an executive briefing. So doing a DMM assessment is a strategic engagement for fueling an EDM program and long-term plan. However, because it is detailed and because it has so many stakeholders engaged, it also leads to many, many tactical improvements in a very short period of time. So you get substantive results in 2 months' time, and 1 month of that is the agency's preparation to get ready for the assessment. So that's gathering work products, getting the participants together, deciding who the interviewees should be, doing the logistics, and reading some educational materials to prepare. The on-site assessment portion is essentially 4 intense days. There are 4 3-hour workshops looking at the entire DMM, process area by process area, interviews and work product reviews. And then the final 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, is devoted to the report and briefing preparation. Now, armed with that knowledge, which is really extensive, and armed with the voice of the customer, which you have achieved by involving your stakeholders, you receive an organization-wide, detailed consensus view of exactly where you are. You've created data awareness, you've created a common language among the key stakeholders, which is a spur to adoption of better practices, and really, really has been effective in fueling governance participation. So if you look at the right, you can see a diagram which is created at the end of those workshops that shows you exactly where you are. The blue line there in the diagram is a made-up organization, and the white line is level 2, the program level, the green line is level 3, our recommended target for all organizations. You also get funding justification and essentially stakeholder pre-approval of your initiatives, because the executives know that they've sent representatives to this. They accept the results because it is indeed a consensus. And most organizations that receive the report and briefing immediately go forward and get funding and launch initiatives. For example, Emarie and I worked with the second largest law firm in the UK, and they've received a bucket of funding, an impressive bucket of funding over their first 18-month period in a time of some cutbacks due to Brexit. So that was a big success story. Another one, American Electric Power, has come up with 2 years of funding and staffing and to launch multiple initiatives. So that is what typically happens based on this assessment. And that's why the organizations find it so valuable. Also, it has kind of a path over the next several years. What should you, particularly as your agency, be doing? And there's a lot of rapid progress that takes place. I can give you examples, but I am wanting to get to the planning. So if you email me and say, give me more examples of how agencies have immediately gained value from this, I would be more than happy to do that. So once you are armed with this knowledge, you know exactly where you are, you know your gaps, you know your strengths, and you know where you're going, and everyone agrees where you should be going, then you need to start on your strategy. But step 1A is to have your data management organization up and ready. Most of you do have data management organizations because public agencies typically, eventually, have decided that they do need a backbone organization to manage and lead all this. And if you don't have one, it is highly advised that you staff this agency. You can start with a couple of people, but it is a permanent, centralized organization within your agency focused on enterprise data. We're going to talk about enterprise data again in a moment. So the EDM program needs a data management organization to help foster and continually push for adoption of capabilities, new capabilities that you are developing, and to manage persistent products like policies, processes, and standards, the business glossary, the metadata repository, the enterprise data model, if you have one, enterprise data privacy standards, and so on, and managing compliance for the policies you put in place. Let's just talk a little bit. This is a sort of an interlude, but anyway, the data management organization will leverage key stakeholders to get ready to develop the strategy. So if you have organization-wide data governance set up, that would be your go-to for the data management organization to work with. Or you can establish a data working group with key representatives that had been identified through the workshops and assessments and interviews. The most important qualification of these governance representatives or data working group members is that they have a lot of knowledge about the agency's most important data assets. So this diagram, I'm not going to explicate in great detail, but I just want to tell you that data management is essentially a centralized function. So when I recommend the data management organization as step 1A of the strategy, that's because they're going to coordinate your data management strategy, your data quality strategy, and eventually your metadata strategy. What knowledge do I need about my data assets? How should I publish it and populate it, and how should I distribute it? So those are key things that it will do, and it will develop with the input of all of those business representatives on the right side. It will develop policies, processes, and standards and maintain them and enhance them as needed, and manage persistent products. And there are some examples of persistent products on the bottom left. So data governance is essentially the collaborative function of mutual decision making. So defining data, defining shared data. What is a client? What is a customer? What is a location? What is a pension plan, etc. Building knowledge, deciding how much knowledge and they need about the data assets, recommending data improvements and working with data quality, thresholds, targets, quality rules, establishing data requirements for shared data, escalating issues, controlling access, and approving all of the products and processes and policies that data management coordinates. So you need both. All right, step 3 in the data management strategy development is to define enterprise data. What is our scope? And the larger and more complex and more mission or business functions your agency has, the tougher this is, but it's a vital step. You have to decide and you have to agree. Typically, the term enterprise data is used for data that's very important to the organization, such that it really will benefit the organization to have enhanced management practices applied to it, like mutually agreed on definition and a target optimized integration structure for shared data, and the designation of authoritative data sources for the most important data, access and usage controls, governance responsibilities, etc. The next bullet talks about categorizing your data assets. So this is how do you decide what enterprise data is that comprises the scope of my data management program. So it often includes highly shared data, and this would be master data, for example, that we've been giving examples about. It can be also including required reporting data. What has to be right? For example, I'm going to use the Pension Benefits Guaranty Corporation again, because one of the things they had to report to Congress every year is, what is your unfunded liability this year? So they had to go through mountains of information, basic data elements, aggregated data elements, calculated data elements, to in their case, arrive at what was essentially one number, which was, this year we are, it might be $55 billion underfunded. So that is all the data elements going into that number would be critical data elements, as an example. And then, of course, data that's essential for any line of production, mission, functions, or business processes is critical data. For example, I've been working with Wells Fargo for the past 2 years. They're about to do their 3rd data management assessment, and they've given the results to their regulators as proof that they've made great progress, which they have. And one of the key business processes there would be loans, right? Wells Fargo initiates a whole lot of loans, commercial and residential loans. So all the data that's required for a loan application to qualify a loan and approve a loan would fall under enterprise data. It's critical data. So once you decide what your enterprise data scope is, that with your working group or your governance group led by the data management organization, then you have to prioritize it across organizational units. And that is where governance really comes into play, because you have to adjudicate the priorities of these representatives of this core shared enterprise data. And that's the devil is in the details, and that's where you'll have challenges, but you must succeed, because step 4, based on the DMM assessment results and your scoping exercises that we just talked about, what disciplines and initiatives are most important to your agency and applied to what scope of data. I'm going to give you an example from the commercial world. Morgan Stanley's board talked to the enterprise data management organization and said, this year I want you to concentrate on data quality, and I want you to aim it at customer accounts. So that's a simple example, but that was actually the board directed. So what am I going to do? Because what data management disciplines are the most important for me based on what my aspirations are? And then what is the first scope to which they will be applied? So the strategy talks about that. Step 5 is to integrate the recommended capability building initiatives that you get from the assessment with the in-flight or planned major programs. So that's how do I integrate all this with what I already have funded, what I already have going on, and big initiatives that I have funded and planned. So examples of there are, if you're implementing data mastering, that would be a really good place to have better data governance, pay attention to data quality, define those shared terms. Migrating to a new ERP system, consolidating operational systems, and if you're implementing a new data lake or you're moving data to the cloud. One of my students was recently did his first DMM assessment for a part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and their entire aim of this massive initiative was to identify, rationalize applications and data stores and determine what should be moved to cloud. And the DMM assessment was going to help them do that by tightening up their processes so they could make better decisions. Step 6 in the EDM strategy is to refine and develop a roadmap sequence plan. So you get something that looks like this. This one happens to be for a data quality strategy. It's a sample, but you have a sequence plan that looks a little bit like the one on the right, and it may have tracks, like what are we going to do about our data management strategy might be one track, governance might be another track, architecture might be another track. So what are we going to do over what time period? What accountability and responsibilities should be assigned? So when, what, when, and who is what the roadmap has in it. At that point, you need to gain executive approval for the strategy and get busy executing. Never let the grass grow under your feet. You need to have a lot of good metrics. So this is what I'm going to tell you about the high-level outline. And of course, you'll get a copy of this slide deck too. So according to the DMM, the EDM strategy for development or enhancement of an EDM program should address these things: vision, goals, objectives, scope, benefits. And you really need to hit the benefits hard, because you want permanent funding for the data management organization. You want permanent funding for the persistent products that your new processes will create, that you're going to need forever. And you're going to want to use a data management framework. Of course, I suggest the DMM as your benchmarking and measurement framework. And there are other frameworks, such as country frameworks and the data management body of knowledge that you can mandate as being useful for your strategy. You want to identify the major gaps that you found and how you're going to remediate them. Overall roles and responsibilities for the data assets, what you're doing about governance, what you're going to do about compliance, of course, very important milestones and success metrics for not only the program as a whole, but for all the disciplines and initiatives that the program encompasses, and a very good sequence plan. Now, for building engagement and adoption in this strategy, we already said that the data management organization will lead this, coordinating heavily with line of business representatives, and of course your approvals need to come from all of your mission functions or lines of business. So we don't have time to address governance in detail, but I just want to say that in every organization, and I have either worked in or heard great detailed stories from hundreds of organizations at this point, and the most successful governance implementations are those that run governance like a series of projects. So with the data management strategy, you have a long-term view, and you know exactly what you're going to be doing over the next several years, and you have a vision of your target state. But for your non-full-time governance representatives, you need to chunk that down into achievable tasks. So I would say whether it is to build out the business glossary or come up with a metadata strategy or agree on a sequence for populating the metadata repository or agree on where the data quality pilot should be from which you will create processes usable across the organization, you need to have small achievements, stop, celebrate, recognize. And this is essential for sustaining participation because the data assets are forever and governance is forever. So everything you can do to have lots of achievements, lots of recognition, and make sure that there are success after success after success. That's going to help you over the years. The other key factor for engagement and adoption of your data management program and everything involved in it is to train your key staff. So there's different types of training, which you should either do quickly or you should do over time. So the people that are participating in the data management strategy and are going to be engaged in some of the data management projects that you kick off, they need training in principles and concepts. They need role training, like what do data stewards do? What do data owners do? What do executive data governance participants do? So everybody needs training in their role. And then for the data stewards or the data working group participants or the physical data custodians, they need training in the skills of their task, how to write a quality rule, how to write a good definition, how to determine external data sourcing requirements, how to work with IT on the data side of an application development project. These are all practical, important skills that people need to learn. And then when you bring in new platforms and technologies, let's say a data governance workflow tool or a new ETL tool and modules, then you're going to need training on the technology and how to maximize them and use them. And then I suggest that the organization also train everyone in that there should be learning or training offered to all new employees, and it should encompass everyone who uses a computer in their work. For example, the importance of careful data entry, using standards for data entry. If you see something wrong, say something. Escalating data issues to management, etc. And if you're interested, there is a computer-based training. It's about 20 minutes long, which will be ready in the next year, and you could ask us about it. We'll be happy to tell you. So with this draws our main presentation to a close, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. We're very happy to send you publications and key articles that are related to this topic. And if you'd like this recording, the key article links, and the introduction to DMM concepts, which is about 50% of the DMM, so that you can become more familiar with it, please email us at these email addresses. And if you think that this resonates with your agency and that it would benefit you, please let us know, and we will schedule a follow-up call with you. And you can contact us. We are a proven team conducting data management assessments worldwide. And Sandhill's related services include metadata management, data architecture support, and data modeling support, and also a universal business glossary to get you started on your business glossary. And data-wise related services include EDM certification training and EDM CBT training, data strategy consulting, and CDO advisory services to help with planning. Also, please link with us on LinkedIn. We would love to get to know you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Emarie for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you for that presentation. That was really very informative. So I would like to start with a few questions that we are asked very frequently. And one of them is, once again, if you could go over, Melanie, how long does it take to do a DMM assessment?
The organization's preparations is 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how distributed it may be, how many locations, and how large it is. Typically, 4 to 6 weeks allows you to do everything to get ready, which is find the people and get the work products and arrange for the meetings and arrange for interviews of relatively senior staff. And then the on-site takes 1 week, and that is the intense engagement of our team with your employees, your designated employees, and then another 3 to 4 weeks for report and briefing development. So it happens very quickly.
Okay, thank you. And what kind of training does the data governance team need to really accelerate their success? What do you recommend there?
I think I addressed that. There are several courses that we offer, and some of them also lead to a certification. One of them is Building EDM Capabilities, which is essentially based on the DMM, but what it does is create a 360-degree view of all these fundamental data management practices for lines of business staff, key IT data program managers, and managers, and people involved in risk or audit, etc. So it's very useful, it's very hands-on, and at the end of it, the CMMI Institute offers an exam, and you can get the Enterprise Data Management Associate certification.
Great, okay, thank you. And what do organizations usually do after they get the assessment results?
What they usually do, and what we advise them to do, is jump right on your approval and funding activities. So, for example, at Fannie Mae, we briefed the CIO, and the CIO turned to the Chief Data Officer and said, prioritize and fund this. There were 9 major initiatives that we proposed the first time we were at Fannie Mae. And this is usually what organizations do. So it's very important to get the assessment report, distribute it to who needs to look at the detail, have the key players get briefed, and then right away start your push for funding so that you can have the data management organization, you can do the data management strategy, and you can immediately start an implementation. Once the executives have understood what you've done and that it represents the voice of the customer, they're going to be in agreement. I've never had a problem with an executive in a briefing saying, this is no good, we don't want to do this. They all want to do it. It's a matter of funding and prioritization. So work very hard to get that launched right away.
Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Emarie.
Thank you.
If there's any more last-minute chats in the last minute, you can go ahead and enter them in on your chat box. But Melanie, on behalf of Sandhill and Emarie, we'd like to thank you for your time today. We certainly hope that our viewers can see the benefits of conducting a DMM assessment and how leveraging external consultants such as yourself can greatly reduce the trial and error in developing a plan for data management success. So with that, I don't see that there's any other questions out there in the chat. I'd like to thank everyone for their time, and we will send a follow-up email with the PowerPoint deck attached so people can review it at their leisure. If they'd like a recording of the presentation, they can email us back as well at the emails you said. Thanks indeed, Melanie. Thanks, Emarie, and thanks everyone to attending. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.